Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the Tamil Nadu government deciding to reopen the controversial Sterlite copper plant owned by Vedanta Limited. We also talk about what the Bombay and Delhi High Court said in two separate hearings regarding COVID-19. But first, we talk about the Election Commission, which is the autonomous body in charge of conducting free and fair elections in India. On Monday, the Madras High Court criticized the commission for not stopping political parties from violating COVID protocols during their campaign rallies. Elections had taken place in 4 states and a union territory recently, and during it, large crowds had gathered for rallies without wearing masks and with no possibility of social distancing. In this segment, Ritika Chopra, who writes on the Election Commission for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about what the Madras High Court said, the extent to which its criticism is fair, and what the Election Commission didn't end up doing.
So on Monday, the Madras High Court, a bench of Chief Justice Sanjeev Banerjee and Justice Senthil Kumar Ramamurthy, they were hearing a case, or rather they were hearing a petition filed by the Tamil Nadu Transport Minister. He had filed a petition basically asking the court to give directions to the Election Commission to implement proper measures on the day of counting, which is May 2nd, basically to implement proper COVID-related precautions on the 2nd of May. In his constituency, basically the constituency that he is contesting from, that's Karur, where about 77 candidates are contesting elections. So he filed a petition urging the court to issue directions to the Election Commission to have proper precautions in place on the day of counting, given that a large number of candidates had actually contested from that seat.
And she says that during this hearing, the High Court came down heavily on the Election Commission and made some strong observations.
I mean, the court said that maybe the Election Commission should be tried for murder charges because start court, it's the only institution responsible for the situation that we are in today, stop court. So it was basically, you said that the commission had been irresponsible and had not been able to actually enforce its own guidelines or precautions that it had laid down for campaigning for the assembly elections happened this month. Those were some strong words that the court used against the Election Commission, kind of almost asking them that were you on another planet when these rallies were happening, because no one attending these rallies were really, for instance, practicing social distancing. So all precautions, everything had gone for a toss at these campaign rallies, and the court was pretty unhappy about it. So in an interim order, the court instructed the commission to actually prepare a blueprint and present it to the court before the day of counting. Yeah, so that's what the court wanted the commission to do. Otherwise, it warned the commission that we're going to stop counting otherwise.
Now, saying that maybe the commission should be charged for murder was obviously a very strong statement. But Ritika did an analysis of the steps that the Election Commission did and did not take, from the time that elections were announced to when the commission first put restrictions on campaigning. So this was a period between February 26 and April 26. And she says that there is definitely some basis to what the Madras High Court said.
So when we analyzed those announcements, it was quite clear that while the cases across the country and in poll-bound states may not have been alarmingly high on the 26th of Feb, but it is a fact that it's around that time that the center had already started flagging problems with at least 3 of the poll-bound states. That's Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and West Bengal. The center had started warning these states that you need to take note of the rising number of cases in your respective states and do something about it. The commission obviously says at that time when we announced election up to the 4th of April, when 4 out of the 5 assemblies had already finished voting, till that time the situation wasn't so alarming. But what was happening is that when you look at the corresponding national and state numbers, the cases were actually progressively increasing.
In fact, on April 4, India had recorded over 103,000 new cases.
And by the time the commission actually took some strong, serious action, what it did was on the 9th of April, when there seemed to be some disquiet about the rising number of cases and the fact that nobody at election rallies was really, kind of wearing masks or practicing social distancing, the commission issued a warning saying that, look, we have certain guidelines in place, and if you don't follow them, we're going to initiate criminal action if necessary. Nothing really happened after that.
And just to be clear, at this time, thousands were gathering in states like West Bengal, where leaders like PM Narendra Modi, Home Minister Amit Shah, and Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee had been campaigning. But after a week, on the 15th of April, when the number of new cases had doubled and India was reporting over 2 lakh new cases a day, it was the political parties that finally requested the Election Commission to wrap up campaigning.
TMC, for instance, said, why don't you club the remaining 3 phases? Because what had happened is by the 15th of April, all the assemblies had finished voting except for West Bengal. West Bengal is an 8-phase election this time. And by around that time, about roughly 4 or 3 phases of voting was left, and parties had, at least Trinamool specifically, urged the commission to club the remaining phases. Congress, for instance, said that why don't you postpone the remaining phases till after Ramzan, because possibly that will give a little more time to, at least Congress felt that would give more time for the situation to stabilize. But on the 15th, the commission's spokesperson came out to categorically deny that there were any plans to club these remaining phases. On the 16th, it imposed some curbs on campaigning, actually in the shape of, they banned campaigning between 7 p.m. and 10 a.m. in the morning. Then on the 21st of April, they actually put their rejection of this demand of clubbing the remaining phases into writing, where they wrote letters to the Congress and the TMC saying that their demands are not feasible and they can't club the remaining phases. And on 22nd of April, and ironically, this was after, I think, almost or maybe within an hour of the Prime Minister announcing that he's cancelling his rallies the next day in West Bengal, the Commission said that we are going to ban all bike rallies and all public gatherings of 500 people and above in West Bengal. So it does seem that it's not as if the Commission was oblivious of the rising number of COVID cases. This is public information. There was some disquiet, which eventually translated into political parties even urging the commission to do something, because they said, look, if we are going to campaign, it's very difficult for us to ensure that the attendees actually practice social distancing, while the commission, on the other hand, kept telling them, no, you have to ensure it, organizers have to ensure this. But eventually, when the stringent curbs on campaigning came, by that time, we had already nationally crossed the 2 lakh mark of fresh new cases every day. And by that time, the number of new cases in West Bengal had touched or was almost 10,000. So it does seem that the commission acted a little too late. But of course, the commission doesn't agree with that. It feels that it was ahead of the COVID curve and it had been taking steps as and when needed.
Now, as mentioned earlier, the West Bengal elections are happening in 8 phases, from the 27th of March to the 16th of May. And despite the rise in cases, the Election Commission did not club the last 2 phases of the election in the state. And Ritika says that for not doing that, it cited 2 reasons: legal constraints and resource constraints.
Legal constraints because the commission said that, look, legally, every phase of election is a separate election. You can't club the campaigning period for the, say, first 5 phases and say that that is good enough for candidates who are, say, going to contest in phases 6, 7, and 8. So illegally, candidate contesting in every phase should have about 14 days of time to campaign. And if we club the remaining phases, it will actually be unfair to the candidates who are actually contesting elections in these phases. In terms of resources, the problem that the commission basically said that, look, these elections are planned way in advance. We have to plan deployment of forces. And all of these things can't be changed overnight. This is difficult. We did speak to a few experts, and a former officer of the Election Commission did tell us that maybe it was difficult to club phases 6, 7, and 8 But there is something very interesting about the Election Commission's poll schedule for phases 7 and 8 this time, that the date of notification of these elections, both these phases were notified on the 31st of March. So by virtue of that, what happened is that their date of withdrawal of nominations was same. So a lot of these dates coincided. So if they actually wanted, there was no legal constraint in actually clubbing phases 7 and 8. They could have clubbed that if they wanted. To this, when we asked senior officers in the Election Commission, they said that, look, even then we still have these resource constraints because the seats in the last three phases have witnessed violence in the past. And in order to ensure free and fair poll, we can't really tinker with the deployment of central forces, and which is why it would be difficult. We can't really club these elections. We can't, instead of say having 30 odd seats in each phase, we can't suddenly have say 70 odd seats and have elections here together. That it would be difficult for us to manage and coordinate.
After the Madras High Court pulled up the commission on Monday, the commission did end up making some changes and reacted to what the court said. If you remember, the matter in the court had been brought up by a local candidate who was concerned how COVID protocols will be followed during the day of counting in Tamil Nadu. So keeping this in mind, on Tuesday morning, the commission passed an order banning victory processions on the 2nd of May.
So what happens is during counting, when it has a very comfortable lead, there are victory processions outside parties. Supporters of candidates and parties kind of take out these victory processions, which end up attract a large number of people. So it's banned that. It has also said that for a candidate going to collect the election certificate, basically these are certificates announcing them as the winner, a candidate going to collect these election certificates can only be accompanied by two people. I mean, there's a cap on the number of people who can accompany the candidate going to collect an election certificate. After that, on Tuesday evening, the commission actually issued a press statement in which the statement was specifically on the Madras High Court issue. This was Commission's way of defending itself. The Commission said that all the strong observations that are being attributed to the court in certain sections of the media today, these are not there in the final order. So we're not really sure if they're trying to say that these things were not said at all, because these were actually said and these were oral observations. And yes, it's true, it's not there in the final order. But the fact is that the court did make very strong observations while hearing this petition on Monday. So the commission has said that, look, these strong observations are not there in the interim order. If you read the written text of the interim order, it's not there. The commission also said that enforcing COVID-related precautions is actually within the remit of state authorities, basically the state disaster management authorities specifically, and that the commission will not take over this role. So if there are any precautions like, for instance, imposing a lockdown or imposing a cap on public gatherings, the commission will not take over that role. It's the responsibility of the SDMAs, the respective SDMAs. And the commission from time to time has been asking stakeholders like political parties and candidates to follow the instructions of the respective SDMAs.
SDMAs meaning the State Disaster Management Authorities. Ritika says that interestingly, the EC in its statement also seemed to rebuttal the criticism it got from the Madras High Court.
The commission in this statement, it said that if the SDMA has not really barred any public gatherings, it didn't say it in as many words, but it did point out that at that time when campaigning was happening, it's not as if the SDMA or the respective state authority had imposed any limitations, any curbs on public gatherings. This is possibly the commission's way of saying that, look, if the state authority didn't do it, I can't ban campaigning completely. I can urge, and I did urge all stakeholders to follow COVID precautions and COVID protocols. And the commission also drew attention to the fact that on Tuesday, Kerala High Court, which is hearing a separate petition on similar issues, said that it was satisfied with the steps that the Election Commission and the state governments had taken for counting on the 2nd of May. So commission basically in its statement overall said that we had protocols in place. We reiterated those protocols. We've been urging stakeholders to kind of practice all of this. And look, at the end of the day, when it comes to enforcing, we can't take it upon ourselves to enforce this. It's the respective state authorities that have to do that. And if they are not going to impose any curbs on public gathering, we can't do that either.
And next we talk about Tamil Nadu. On Monday, the Tamil Nadu government decided to reopen the controversial Sterlite copper plant in the Thoothukudi district. The plant, which is owned by the mining company Vedanta Limited, had earlier been shut down after many years of protests and environmental concerns. But it is now going to be reopened so that it can be allowed to generate oxygen. At a time when India is facing an oxygen shortage to treat COVID-19 patients. In this segment, Arun Janardhanan, who reports on Tamil Nadu for the newspaper, joins us to talk about what led to the decision to reopen the plant and the history of protests and controversies around it. And he explains that ever since the plant was first set up in 1994, people have been peacefully protesting against it. And these protests have lasted over 2 decades.
One of the first public protests emerged in 1997 when people started falling sick in the neighborhood of the plant. And in 1998, there was a report by the National Environmental Engineering Research Institute, NEERI, against the plant for not keeping up or for not maintaining a green belt surrounding the plant. So since then, there were a lot of litigations, many inspections from the committees sent by the Supreme Court, the Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board. There were many incidents of gas leak. For example, in 1999, there were people hospitalized in the neighborhood after an episode of gas leak. In 2010, Madras High Court ordered closure of the plant for violating rules, environmental rules, and for heavy pollution. The same month, in fact, Vedanta managed to get a stay order from Supreme Court to vacate this stay, and they continued operation. In 2013, there was another gas leak, and the state government ordered to shut the plant. And again, the next month, this order came in 2013 March. In April 2013, Supreme Court fined them rupees 100 crore for flouting environmental norms. But even if the copper plant was fined for pollution and many other violations, the court did not favor the closure of the plant. So it was again operational from June 2013.
All this while people had been claiming and making allegations that the plant was harming the environment, polluting the water bodies around it, and damaging people's health. Arun says that during gas leaks, there were incidents of people falling sick, getting allergies, reports of miscarriages, and other more durable health complications. But the plant, despite everything, continued to function. And peaceful protests continued as well. But Arun says that in early 2018, there were reports that this plant was going to be further expanded. And that's when the protests became even more massive.
And within a month, the plant was shut for annual maintenance. And the state Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board, TNPCB, they refused to renew the consent of operations. But the demand of public was that they need a permanent closure of the plant. So they refused to call off the protests. There were multiple negotiations from the government. There were parallel litigations happening in the court. So finally, what happened is in May 2018, there was a massive rally organized by protesters to the district collectorate. And the state government was the culprit there. The demand was that the state government should order to shut the plant. And this rally ended up in violence. And there was a police firing and 13 people killed in the police firing, including some children. That was a brutal incident that triggered a massive anger against the state government as well as the center, the judiciary. So it was as the protest evolved and emerged, and there were multiple cases of gas leaks and other pollutions. And similarly, there were a lot of other cases where the government and the judiciary finding fault with the company for running operations, unlicensed operations, meaning kind of production beyond the capacity for which they had a permission to produce. So a lot of these things happened, but people had a larger feeling that both the state the environmental bodies of the government and the judiciary, they all colluded in favor of the plant. So that is what led to this massive anger and the police firing. So that is what finally led to the position of state government to permanently shut the plant, and they disconnected the power connections and everything. And state government and all political parties in the state now have a position that the plant should not be reopened for the production.
But now, all these years later, the state government has decided to reopen the plant. This all started because Vedanta Limited approached both the central government and the state to allow them to reopen the plant to produce medical oxygen, considering the COVID-19 crisis and the oxygen shortage that many states are facing.
So that is how they moved an urgent petition in Supreme Court, and it was heard by the first bench. And the Supreme Court naturally was in favor of the idea, since there is a shortage of oxygen. The central government also was in favor of the proposal put forth by the Vedanta Limited, but the Tamil Nadu government opposed it. Tamil Nadu government said that we cannot do it. So there were multiple negotiations that happened at the court itself, where the Supreme Court asked the state government to consider it further, to pursue it further. And that led to a public hearing at Thoothukudi last week, where the district collector invited stakeholders, meaning the people, the representatives and people who led this anti-pollution movement against Sterlite plant. So this meeting, in fact, the majority of the people opposed the idea. They felt that it was yet another strategy of Vedanta Limited to reopen the plant. So they said in the meeting that this is an attempt for a backdoor entry. They said that we do not want to allow this.
So this public hearing in Thoothukudi was a failure. But Arun says that after this, the state government made one more attempt. And the state chief minister called for an all-party meeting in Chennai on Monday,
in which DMK, CPM, Congress and representatives of all major parties attended this meeting, in which they managed to reach a consensus where it was decided that the plant may be reopened, provided it will not be used for any other production purpose of the Vedanta Limited. It will be only used for oxygen production. Only the mechanics, the technicians of Sterlite Copper, for the purpose of oxygen production, will be allowed to enter the plant. A committee will be formed led by the district collector and SP, along with people's representatives, including villagers and political party representatives. They will be allowed to monitor, or they will be monitoring the entire operation of production. Yet another condition was that this temporary permission to reopen the plant will be for a period of 4 months, and that the requirement of oxygen for Tamil Nadu will be prioritized. So on these conditions, there was a decision yesterday or the opposition parties who were at the forefront of fighting for the justice of Thoothukudi people, especially people who led the protest and the families of people who were killed in the police firing in 2018. So these parties yesterday agreed to reopen the plant considering this pandemic and the crisis.
Now, yesterday, that is on Tuesday, the Supreme Court allowed Vedanta to operate the plant in view of national need for oxygen. The court did, however, add that Vedanta shall not be allowed to enter and operate its copper smelting plant under the garb of this order. The court also added that there should be no political bickering over this decision, considering the crisis that India is facing. And this is the decision that people opposing the plant were fearing. Arun says that during the public hearing in Thoothukudi, this point had been brought up.
So after majority of the people opposed the idea of reopening, the collector in fact asked them what will happen if the Supreme Court give a judicial order, a proper order to reopen the plant in spite of all these opposition. So the reply of the people was that if such a scenario comes up, you dismantle the entire copper plant. The state government, for the fact that they also support the cause of people, you dismantle the plant and leave this oxygen production portion alone and let the state government do it. Let the state government lead the oxygen production process to make sure that it will not be used by the company to manipulate or to misuse it in a later stage to continue their operations.
In the end, we bring you some COVID-19 updates. India, which has been recording over 3 lakh COVID-19 cases every day since the last 4 days, now accounts for 38% of worldwide infections, the highest share reached by any country at any stage of the pandemic. According to the data of the Johns Hopkins University, a month ago this number stood at just 9%. At this time, several states have been struggling to bring down the curve, and their health infrastructure is being severely overburdened. Also during this time, many high courts, such as the Madras High Court, have been pulling up different administrations. Like yesterday, the Delhi High Court told the Delhi government that their confidence is shaken and that Delhi should put its house in order. It said this while hauling the capital up for rampant black marketing of oxygen cylinders and essential drugs in the national capital. The court also asked Delhi to submit a report about the deaths which have taken place on account of shortage of oxygen. Meanwhile, the Bombay High Court yesterday sought to know from the central government as to why private individuals were getting COVID-19 drugs such as remdesivir directly from pharmaceutical companies, while the companies are required to provide the entire production to the center, which enables distribution to states. The court was hearing a PIL regarding improper management of COVID-19 treatment in Maharashtra. During the hearing, the court took serious note of the incident where Sujay Patil, the BJP MP from Ahmednagar, allegedly distributed over 10,000 vials of remdesivir after procuring them from Delhi. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.